Well, I see you have arrived. I admire your courage. And who am I? Just think of me as your very own personal ghost host. I'm here to tuck you in tonight. So, lock your windows and doors, look in your closet and under your bed, and hold your blankets tight, and prepare for 6 terrifyingly true ghost stories. Our first story of the night comes from a newbie to Reddit. It's called A Shadow Creature, Just What Crossed Our Path That Night.
Please be kind here. I don't even like to tell this story because I feel like no one will believe me. I'm relatively new to Reddit, but seeing others share their experiences here made me finally think maybe it's time I tell mine. Side note, my friends' names have been changed for this story as they are still together and very reluctant to ever bring this up. This must have been around 2007. One night, 2 friends and I were out ghost hunting in a very remote little town in western New York. My friend Jane wanted a couple more pictures in the old cemetery, so her boyfriend and I waited in my SUV while she did her thing. It must have been around midnight, and we were parked on a back road, but there were some streetlights up ahead. Jane was behind us and off to the right, but we could still see her and her flashlight. John and I happened to be looking up the road when, about 50 to 65 yards ahead, out from under the streetlight on the left-hand side, appeared a black figure in a wide brim hat. He just appeared. It was blacker than black, more like a void. 100%, it was not a person. This being had absolutely no features, but we could make out the hat from the profile. It was a flat-top hat with a wide brim around it. On my mother's grave, it took maybe 30 steps before it morphed, only way I can describe it, into a black cat before it reached the streetlight on the opposite side of the road and disappeared into a field. Again, you could tell it was the shape of a cat, but it was just a black void. John and I stared at each other for about 2 minutes before we could even speak. When the time came, all he could say was, "You saw that too, didn't you?" We continued to sit there in absolute awe and sheer terror. Jane came back not long after, and I couldn't even move to unlock the doors. I was able to move my hand just enough to hit the unlock button and let her back in. She jokingly said, "You both look like you saw the devil himself." John was a huge guy, very tall, muscular, and intimidating. I looked back over and he was shaking and in tears. All he could say was, "Cat." I tried to explain to Jane what had happened, but I struggled to even talk. It was about a 35-minute drive back home, and I can remember Jane saying things like, "This isn't funny anymore. You guys are scaring me." John insisted we take him to his church, where we both said a prayer to Mother Mary at the outdoor statue. While he continued to pray, I tried to explain to Jane what we had seen. I remember telling her and thinking how crazy I sounded. To this day, it still gives me a chill to my core. Whatever it was not of this earth is all I know. A part of me wants answers so badly, but then I keep thinking maybe I'm better off not knowing exactly what it was. Jane and I lost touch over the years, but did reconnect eventually. We talked about that night as it was always the elephant in the room. She told me that following that incident, all of the crosses in her mom's house would randomly turn upside down for a couple weeks after this happened to us. It only stopped when Jane's mom went around the house very deep in prayer and blessed it. Jane and John lived with her at the time. Did something follow them home? I've never seen anything like that again, and I pray I never will. Thanks for letting me share here.
Man, black cats have such a bad reputation, don't they? Our next one is a short one, but cool nonetheless. We call it, What Was Calling My Name?
So, when I was around 13 or 14, I lived in a 2-story house. When you walk in the front door, there's the stairs straight in front of you. To the left was a bedroom that you had to walk through to get to my brother's bedroom. After my grandmother passed away, we used the front room as a gaming room, and I was obsessed with Diablo 3. My brother and his friends were in the back bedroom while I was playing Diablo. I could hear them back there goofing off. I didn't have a headset at the time, and the TV was turned up just enough for me to hear it. Well, I hear my brother calling my name, so I yell back, "What?" and no answer, but I could still hear them back there. I get up, kinda aggravated because I know he heard me answer and go open the door. Dead silence. Nobody is in there, and they had apparently left a while before. They went through the back door like an hour before this happened. So what was calling my name and making noises of all of their laughter?
Well, that was a bit weird, wasn't it? Next, we got one from a dude that had tons and tons of experiences growing up. It's called the Old Homestead.
I grew up in rural Nebraska, and as our house was quite old, we've had a number of unusual occurrences. I'm an adult now, but I wanted to make sure I wrote down these memories before the slow march of time fades them away. Please enjoy my childhood ghost stories. When I was 7 years old, my family moved from suburban Omaha to the countryside of northern Nebraska, the same region where my father was born and raised. We purchased an old homestead, built in the 1800s, and renovated it to fit our growing family. I remember being amazed when my dad showed me the ancient logs they'd extracted from the walls while remodeling the home, proving the incredible age of the structure. Dad held onto the logs, and I believe they're still in a shed somewhere on the property. When the house was finally ready for us to move in, no activity immediately began, at least to my knowledge. Being an amalgamation of an old cabin, a farmhouse, a bungalow, and then a modern construction, the house became something of a labyrinth to navigate, and so it was easy to get spooked while retrieving a can of tomato preserves from the basement, or trying to find the bathroom at night in the long hallways. But I don't remember anything particularly paranormal until after we'd lived there for a fair amount of time. I was 10 when my youngest sister was born, and as infants are prone to waking up several times a night, my other 2 sisters and I shared a bedroom. We had bunk beds and a toddler bed all in one room. I slept on the top bunk, and often my younger sister below me would get scared in the middle of the night, get out of bed, and ask my dad to lie down on the floor beside her until she fell asleep. He'd reluctantly comply almost every time, and so often I saw the top of my dad's head go past the top bunk as he led my sister back to bed. However, I remember one night seeing the top of his head go past my bed, and not more than a moment later, I looked over the ledge to watch my dad put my sister back in bed only to find my sister fast asleep and my dad nowhere to be found. Initially I was confused, but then remembered that I didn't hear any footsteps when I saw the head pass by, and my dad is a rather noisy walker, even when he's trying to be quiet. But in my young mind, I chalked it up to seeing things that weren't there and forgot about it, at least until my mom started asking me if I'd ever experienced anything odd in the house. My mother would ask me this after I reported to her that I'd seen a woman in our house that I didn't know. Because the homestead was so remote, we'd often have to rise before the sun in order to catch the bus to school. So in the dark of early morning, I'd brush my teeth and change into my school clothes, and as I was turning to leave the bathroom to get some breakfast, I saw a woman with brown hair, the features of her face obscured, dressed in a white, flowing dress. I initially didn't do a double take, as I thought maybe my mom, who also has brown hair, maybe stepped into the bathroom without my hearing, as I'd left the door open while I brushed my teeth. But a strange feeling overtook me, and I did look back no more than a moment after seeing her, and the woman was gone. The apparition had completely vanished. I staggered backwards out of the bathroom into the hallway, almost more confused than scared, but frightened, nonetheless. I told my dad, and then my mom when I got home from school. That's when she asked if I'd experienced anything else that might be paranormal, or as she called it, spiritual. So, I told her about the woman in white, as well as the shadow I'd seen pass by my bed. But then there was one other story I'd almost forgotten about, and one that she'd forgotten also. It wasn't more than a few months earlier that I was in my dad's makeshift basement office, doing homework on the only desktop computer our family owned, when I heard a voice behind me. "That's some nice work, Sonny," the voice said, and pretty clearly I recognized it as my grandmother. Great-grandma Alice lived a few miles up the road on a farm of her own, and so it was pretty common that she'd visit. "Thanks, Grandma," I mumbled, engrossed in my work. I finished a little while later, and coming back upstairs I asked my mom if Grandma Alice had already gone home. She looked at me quizzically and said that Grandma had never been over. I told her that I just heard her voice downstairs. "You must be hearing things," she said, returning to the food she was preparing for dinner. While my mother was dismissive at the time, when she asked if I'd ever experienced anything spiritual in the house, she began taking notes, listing off everything I'd seen and heard. I guess there is something of a spiritual sensitivity that runs in her side of the family. She, as well as my grandparents, have several stories of ghostly and demonic encounters that I'd love to share in further posts. I have another story that took place in that house rather recently that I'm compelled to share, but it's incredibly personal, and it's an experience of my mother's, not mine. As a child, my deathly fear of ghosts became a fascination. And still as an adult I love hearing a good ghost story. Now, 20-some-odd years later, my wife is pregnant with our first child, and I'm eager to see if my family's sensitivity passes to our baby as well.
Wow, that's one hell of a house, ain't it? I think we'd all love to hear your mom's story, if it's okay with her, of course. Before we get into our next tale, I just want to take a moment to remind you to, assuming your hands are not trembling with terror at the moment, hit like and subscribe. It'll really raise our spirits, so to speak. And if you don't, I swear I'll come and haunt your house. I'll rattle chains at all hours of the night, yell boo while you're trying to sleep. I'll raid your fridge, and I'll, try on all your clothes and stuff. Just a lot of scary stuff. This one comes from a guy that has had a lot of encounters from the time he was 6 and beyond. It's called My Family Experiences.
So, since I was a kid, I've always had my fair share of paranormal encounters. Honestly, since I was 6. My first experience happened not long after a relative of mine's passing, the Gatsby gal of Long Island. I don't have huge amounts of memories of her, but I do remember her voice, as she was my second cousin's mother and babysat me often when I was little. Now this happened before I knew of her passing, but one night I woke up in the middle of it. I don't remember the time, but I do remember her voice going baby, followed by the sounds of an infant crying. Considering I was about 5 or 6, it fudging terrified the crap out of me, and I felt extremely unsafe in my room and was silently crying my eyes out. And that's saying something, as I cried loudly as a kid, so for me to stay silent without a peep is concerning. For about 10 minutes, I stayed under the blanket, but the fear in me only got worse. I still remember how I felt to this day. Felt like my heart was pounding, and that something was near me, but from every angle, if that makes sense. Like I was surrounded. Eventually I just run upstairs, not seeing anything, but wasn't sure what to do and ran into my little sister's room, shutting the door and turning the closet light on, all to make sure I can see my surroundings, and that my sister was safe. My dumbass should have gone to my father. Now I've had a few other encounters through my adolescence, but things got worse as I grew into an adult, going from, okay, that's a little scary, to legitimate primal fear. Both me and my full-blooded sister would have sleep paralysis events. Mine started when I was an infant from what my parents told me, and I think are coming back unfortunately. They both tell me that I'd have extreme nightmares. Whereas an infant and toddler, I'd become so stiff that they couldn't even bend my arms or legs. These other events happened when I was a little older, where I'd wake up almost every other night and stay awake due to sudden and extreme fear, not being frozen but feeling as if something was near me. And I think I've even seen and heard things. But those memories are hazy. Mostly, I can still move and talk, but almost always end up under my covers. Sometimes sensing something next to me, and could almost mentally visualize it, and it was consistent every time. My sister would have the more common types, where she'd be unable to move but would see and feel things climb on top of her and strangle or supposedly crush her. She described them all as shadow people, but more the one that sat on her was skinny and childlike in size. I eventually stayed with my mother for a bit when I was about 18. I'm 24 now. And this incident happened months after another of my cousins passed away, albeit with a more peaceful passing, to put it nicely. My mother had a guest room on the first floor, which was connected to the boiler room. Now in this house, I did have prior experiences, as did my half-siblings. But this room is what mortified me. I'll say their story later. I was laying down, was maybe 4 in the morning. I don't recall fully. All I knew is that at one point I was asleep, hence I suddenly jolted awake and sat fully up. I don't even think I was fully conscious when I did, but I felt as if something was just rushing me in the middle of the night. I was breathing heavy and was fully awake now, looking around the room for anything, but didn't see crap. I calmed myself down and decided to try and go back asleep, albeit with the closet light on now, which I'm surprised I didn't even have on to begin with, as complete darkness terrifies me. Well, the second I shut my eyes and my head touches the pillow, which I swear I didn't even fully lay down, I get the feeling again, but this time way more forceful, causing me to stand right up and glue myself to a wall. I still didn't see crap, but this time I continue to feel the fear, as if something's in the damn room again. I just bolted upstairs to my mother's room, a full-grown man completely terrified, and explained to her what happened, and slept on the floor for the night. Before this, the fire alarms would constantly go off in the middle of the night, annoying as fudge, and making our dog freak out, but harmless. We thought this could have been my second cousin that passed away. For privacy, we'll call her Carol. We thought Carol was messing with us, as it was sort of something we'd think she'd do. But I highly doubt she'd be what rushed me. Other than that, my half-siblings both recall just apparently randomly looking out the same window. They have 2 separate rooms, but both just went to this one. And from what both tell me and my full sister, they saw floating black people. I asked them to clarify, and not black as in African American, but apparently jet black skin, and said a few floated out the second-story window. Looking at them, whole others were on the ground. Keep in mind they were both barely 9 and 10, and never watched scary movies. I was babysitting them that night, and decided to have us all sleep in the same room. Not like I could have called the cops for these black men. I'm starting to think either my family or me are somehow haunted, or more spiritually in tuned, or whatever the term is. And while I love that stuff, stories and the like, when it comes to experiencing these presences, I hate it. These are the few times I've ever felt truly in danger. I love to research these things, but honestly, I'm not sure what these occurrences can even be. Any ideas?
Holy crap, that's a lot to take in. But I think you made the right call by not calling the cops. I could just hear the call now. Ring ring. 911, please state the nature of the emergency. Yeah, I got a bunch of these shadow guys floating outside my second-story window. Click. Next, we have one from a young lady that was terrified by a ghost while she was babysitting her siblings. We call it Unexplainable Halloween Night for me and my siblings.
It all happened about 13 years ago. I was about 14 years old, and I will always remember that late evening. A bit of context first. We are 8 siblings, 4 girls, 4 boys, raised only by Mom. Dad walked out on us a few years prior to the event I am about to tell. We grew up quite modest. Mom was the only breadwinner, we didn't have a lot, and we were living in a rental that was just a bathroom, a small hallway, a living room that doubled as a bedroom for the girls and Mom, and a kitchen that also doubled as bedroom for the boys. Anyway, we were a content Christian family. It was the 31st of October, and we were the only 7 at home. My oldest sister was out and Mom was at work. Me being the second one, I was in charge. It was about 7 p.m. and we were all in the living room minding our business. Some of us were playing with some toys, I was painting, a few were watching TV, and it was quite peaceful, just waiting for Mom to come home. Suddenly, my younger brother said, "Hey guys, do you hear that?" We turned the TV volume down and listened. From across the hallway that were connecting the 2 main rooms, we could all clearly hear a repetitive, high-pitched banging. It was just as like someone was repeatedly hitting a spoon on a cup. We all stood frozen. It went on for a few minutes and then we stopped. All bundled up together, we slowly crept our way to the kitchen. On the table, there were some stuff like the bread, butter, and a jar with a spoon in it. We just ate, and we didn't put stuff away. We got close and tried to mix the jam with the spoon, and surely enough, it was the same sound. At this point, we didn't know what was the deal, and we were really creeped out. The sound we heard couldn't have been produced by something like the wind or other exterior forces. It was very deliberate. And it went on for a few minutes, so not just a spoon falling off or something like that. We put the things away and we went back to the living room. That is when the horror really started. I kid you not, around the whole house there were unexplainable banging. We could hear footsteps in the hallway, above us from the attic, around us from the walls. We all started crying and got into bed, all bundled up, praying. It all went like this for a few minutes, and suddenly we heard the house door open. It was Mom. She just came back from work, and it all stopped. Needless to say, we all jumped on her, hugging her and crying. We told her what happened, and she was shocked. We never had an experience like that again, and when we get together, we sometimes talk about it. It was one of the most scary things that ever happened to us. We all heard the same things. We didn't see anything, but the sounds were real. We think it might have been something like a demonic attack that wanted to create fear in us in one of the darkest nights of the year. Did any of you ever experience something like this?
Maybe the ghost in the kitchen was just telling you guys to clean up your crap. It's kind of funny that they stopped when your mom got home though. It's like they went, "Hey, you guys, we gotta knock our crap off. Mom's home." Our last tale for the night comes from a guy that gets a visit from a friend. It's entitled, My Childhood Friend Named Keith.
I had a childhood friend named Keith. He was my dad's friend first. A handyman. Curly blonde hair. Light eyes. Beach bum tan. Probably in his late 30s, early 40s. He would also kid sit, as we called it, me from time to time. I must have been like 10, maybe 11. He let me watch my first R-rated movie, I Come in Peace, with Dolph Lundgren. He was that really cool guy you get to know in your childhood, when you just start feeling like you're growing up. Keith let me tag along with him throughout the house, as he installed our alarm system. To me, he was like a hero. His tool belt, like any superhero's gadget belt. I explored other worlds with him. I got to go under the house and explore that crawl space. There was this gross section to my left that was nothing but cobwebs. I hate spiders. I also got to climb up a ladder into our attic for the first time. That, and check out the crawl space above my parents' bedroom. Then one day, I remember my father telling me Keith passed away. He was the first person I knew who wasn't alive anymore. I was at my grandparents' house. My parents didn't want to tell me how he passed. But later on in life, I found out he fell asleep at the wheel and went straight under a parked semi in a most gruesome fashion. I don't think my father ever fully recovered from Keith's passing. One evening, not long after Keith's passing, my mom, my sister, and I were hanging out in the kitchen. It was night. We were standing in a triangle, and the door to the right of us is my parents' bedroom door. It was open. No one was in there. It was just the three of us. All the lights were on. The conversation trickled to a halt. We all were hearing something. Something above us. We first thought the sound was coming from the attic. But no, it was the crawl space. The last place Keith had been working in. What we were hearing were heel-to-toe footsteps. They were pacing back and forth. This must have gone on for a minute or so. Heel to toe. Heel to toe. There was no doubt. We all recognized the same thoughts on each other's faces. We knew immediately it was Keith. I remember my mom telling him it was okay. And he's safe. The walking stopped. To this day, my mom, my sister, and I still consider this a single solitary supernatural event the three of us experienced together. I miss Keith.
Well, it sounds like Keith was an amazing man, and he had an amazing taste in movies as well. I love I Come in Peace. I guess Keith always has been, and will always be, your hero. That was some scary stuff tonight, wasn't it? But do you know what is not scary? hitting like, subscribe, and sharing this video. It'll really help us keep the ghosts at bay. However, if you prefer podcast, then you're in luck, because we also release our videos in podcast form on Spotify. And of course, if any of you have a story to share, then by all means, drop me a line in the comments. But I do want to thank you for stopping by, and I hope the stories we told won't be giving you too many bad dreams. But if they do, then maybe you shouldn't run from them. After all, sometimes it's better to embrace your nightmares.